Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of Mr. Mackenzie's Distance Learning, The Move to Global War, Italian Aggression, 1933 to 40. Let's begin now. So here, yet again, we have our map. Expansion in Europe, 1931 to 1939. Obviously, the highlighted countries here is Germany and Italy. These countries will become known as the Axis powers of Europe. So we have to imagine this. Like we know, like the Earth revolves around an axis. It's that same type of mentality that between Germany and Italy, an axis is running that all of Europe is revolving around. So Italy and Germany are really right in the eye of the storm or the center of the universe that is Europe. And then when eventually Japan's going to be involved in the Axis powers, it's going to be like the idea that the whole world revolves around these three Axis powers. But right now, what we really want to do is focus on Italy. We'll get to Germany shortly. We want to really discuss why is Mussolini looking to expand? And a lot of that has to do with the fascist ideology. Fascism really glorifies war for war's sake. Mussolini and the fascists are really going to see war as a good thing. War is good for the nation. War is good for the state. So with this ideology, the idea that Italy will grow and use its military. So it's going to create its military, and then eventually it's going to use it. I mean, you don't build up a huge military for it to just sit around. Italy wants to expand for imperial reasons. Okay, they want to be seen as a great power in Europe. Mussolini wants to recreate the greatness of the Roman Empire, and he really wants to make that Mediterranean Sea a Roman lake again. So we already saw in last episode how Mussolini is starting to envision himself as the next Caesar of the Roman Empire. He really wants to bring that kind of idea and propaganda to the surface again, that Mussolini is a new Caesar and he is creating a new Roman Empire. Mussolini the Nationalist. We have to remember that Mussolini is a fervent nationalist. We've seen in the 1920s how Italy is really trying to be internationalist, in just the same way Japan was as well. But deep down, in reality, Mussolini is a fervent nationalist, okay? Ultra-nationalistic is obviously they're opposed to this idea of internationalism. Doesn't really want to work with these other nations. Okay, he's opposed to working with these other nations. So this is really in contrast to what Italy was doing in the 1920s by signing all the international treaties that we've gone through. Members of the League of Nations, signing the Locarno Treaty, being part of the Washington Naval Treaty, signing the Kellogg-Briand Pact, with the whole idea is just to outlaw war, that war is not a plausible decision in foreign policy. So if Mussolini is opposed to this internationalism, why does he sign all these treaties? I mean, why be a part of it? If Mussolini is a fervent nationalist, why is he signing the Locarno treaties, the Washington Naval Treaty, the Kellogg-Briand Pact? Why is he doing this? Well, the answer is simply, his military is not built up yet. In the 1920s, Italy is not ready to take an aggressive military action. His military is not built up, and it's going to take time for that to happen. So in the meantime, in the 1920s, he really has to seem on the world stage that he is an international player with this idea of collective security, even though he probably thinks that it stinks. By 1929, Italy is also in an economic crisis. Italy finds itself in the grips of the Great Depression. We've gone over the Great Depression before. We looked at this with Japan as well. We know that the Great Depression starts in the United States. But really, it's going to impact any country they do business with. So any country that the United States is in business with is going to be affected by this. And Italy is one of those. So Italy, Germany, and Japan will be negatively affected by the depression. Italy will lose outside investors. Unemployment will skyrocket in Italy. It leaves many civilians upset, obviously. Okay, so there's a lot of people within Italy now are going to be upset. Prices of grain and wheat begins to the prices for bread drops, which is obviously really just going to hurt the farmers. So now we see we're having a lot of disparity and tension inside the borders of Italy. Economic depression is a great factor for that as well. So what is the response to the economic woes of the Great Depression? What is Italy, or at least Mussolini's, answer to this? Well, Mussolini's fascist-led government will respond in two ways. First, it pushes Italy to become an autarky, buy Italian products. Italy means to be self-sufficient and independent. The idea here is not to buy any foreign goods. The Great Depression taught Italy that it has to rely on itself. Protect your own industry. Mussolini will move more aggressively to create this empire. This will really support Italy's economy, and it will ultimately take the minds off Italians. It'll take the minds of Italians off their economic woes that the Great Depression has caused. Obviously, war is a distraction. People become more patriotic during wartime, and it will ultimately bring more support for the government. So what does Mussolini do? What does Mussolini do? In 1933, Mussolini signs the Four-Power Pact with Britain, France, and Germany. Now I have two questions here I'd like you to think about. How does this contrast the League of Nations? How does Italy signing this Four-Power Pact, or the existence of this Four-Power Pact of Britain, France, Germany, and Italy, how does this contrast the League of Nations? And what does this mean for Italy on the world stage? I'd like you to pause the video and try and answer this in your notes, and then I guess you'll just hear of what I have. Okay, so how does this contrast the League of Nations? How does the Four-Power Pact contrast the League of Nations, and what does this mean for Italy on the world stage? Well, this is in contrast to the League of Nations because really you only have 4 members. Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. Only 4 members, which says, basically kind of stating to the world that they are the bigger nations, the empires of Europe, and that they shouldn't really have to worry about all the smaller nations. In reality, the pact doesn't really do anything, but with the inclusion of Italy with the other great powers, all of a sudden Italy is elevated to be perceived as a great power. Things have changed since World War I. Pre-World War I Italy was not a major empire. Now it looks like they are. This takes us to 1934 Austria. And for a little bit, we're going to be talking about Germany and Austria, but obviously this is going to play a big role in Italy's foreign policy as well. We're going to go a lot more in depth on this when we get to Germany. But for the next couple of slides, we're really going to be talking about Germany and what kind of Italy's response to that is, how that's really affecting Italy. So here we are now in 1934 in Austria. And the Nazis have murdered the Austrian Chancellor, their president, Engelbert Dollfuss. Great name. Now, this is obviously going to worry Italy. This is where Italy comes in, is that this is going to start making them very nervous in Italy, especially in the northern borders, because right now, Austria is a great little buffer state between Germany and Italy. So they're going to notice, Mussolini's going to notice anything that's going on within Austria, particularly how the Germans are dealing with them. So Hitler wants Austria. Hitler wants to annex them. Hitler wants a union with Austria. He wants Anschluss. Anschluss. Just a great word. In fact, if you're listening to this in headphones, I suggest you just yell out the word loud in your living room right now. Anschluss, and see if anyone looks your way. Don't say another word. Just go right back to listening. I'll pause for you to yell it out. Anschluss. Just a great word. So Anschluss, or a political union with Austria, is forbidden. This is forbidden by the League of Nations. That was one of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, that Germany was not to have a political union, or Anschluss, with Austria. So the very idea that the Nazis are thinking about going in and taking over Austria is going against the Treaty of Versailles. But it looks like there's a lot of political chaos going on in Austria. They've just suffered a political assassination of their chancellor. So it looks like a lot of upheaval is going on in Austria. Hitler's going to use this assassination as an excuse to move in to Austria. It's going to give him an excuse to move into Austria. He's going to feel like he can go in and calm it all down. Now, Italy is not happy with this. Why? Why is Italy not happy with this? Because they're going to change their tune on this whole thing in a couple of years. But here we are in 1934, and it looks like Germany is making steps to go in and annex or take over Austria. Italy is not happy with this. Well, let's just look at that map right there. And we can tell Austria is that buffer state. It's a nice little buffer or protection between Greater Germany and Italy. So Italy doesn't want Hitler to do this. Austria is a buffer state between Italy and Germany. So the Italian army is moved to the northern border with Austria. Mussolini is ready to fight if Germany threatens Austria. Basically, Mussolini says, stay out of Austria, Hitler. So in July of 1934, Hitler backs down. He backs down. Mussolini kind of calls their bluff on this kind of quick annexation of Austria. Hitler backs down. Basically, because he doesn't have the military to do it. Okay? Germany has not built up its army, and they're not ready to go in and take over. They will in a couple of years, but as of right now in 1934, they're not. They do not have a big military. They only have a small defensive army. So as this is all going on, this is Germany is rearming during this time. They are starting to rebuild their army during this time, but they're not ready to use it yet. But there will come a time in a couple of years when their army will be big enough, and eventually they will have Anschluss, or a political union with Austria. But by then, Italy is going to need a friend and be more than welcoming Germany to go in and take over Austria. So this rearmament program that Germany is conducting is really starting to threaten Italy, Britain, and France. Remember, all four of them were a part of the Four-Power Pact, which really didn't do anything. But now it looks like Germany is starting to feel a little bit free to step out of the confines of the Treaty of Versailles. And Italy, Britain, and France, they don't like that. So the Stresa Front is created. The Stresa Front is created. So Mussolini is basically going to meet with his British and French counterparts, and create this union, this Stresa Front, to maintain the status quo in Europe. But ultimately, what they really want to do is hold Germany to the Treaty of Versailles and make sure they don't step out of bounds of those treaties that they've agreed to, or to the terms that they've agreed to. Really to maintain the status quo in Europe. Now here we have another political cartoon by an IB favorite, David Lowe. Hopefully you can find maybe a more clear or better version in Google Image and kind of keep that in your notes. But here we have three figures in a barrel in the middle of the ocean. We have Britain, Italy, and France together in this barrel of collective isolation. Obviously, you can easily pick out Mussolini, who looks like he's the captain of the ship there with a paper hat. But they've been isolated. The Stresa Front has made those three nations isolated from probably the rest of the world, or at least the rest of Europe. The caption says, 3 wise men of Stresa went to sea in a barrel. If the barrel had been stronger, my story would have been longer. So I guess the idea here is that the Stresa Front doesn't really last too long. Ultimately, if you can see what's starting to swarm around them is the periscopes from Nazi U-boats, that they're slowly being surrounded very quietly and stealth-like by Germany. So, being a member of the Stresa Front with Britain and France really allows Mussolini to act more aggressively. Suddenly, Mussolini feels like he's able to be more aggressive in his foreign policy. Why? Why does Mussolini act more aggressively now that he's a part of this Stresa Front? Well, Mussolini feels that Britain and France are working with him against Germany. So he feels like he is now kind of partnered with Britain and France. All three of them seem to be working against Germany. So while it seems like Britain and France might be a little worried about Germany, Mussolini and Italy feel free to act in the south, looking to Africa. Okay, as things are developing now in Central Europe, with Germany, with its rearmament program, looking to kind of annex Austria, Mussolini has signed a pact or a Stresa Front with Britain and France, and they're all worried about Germany. Mussolini feels now he has a little bit of freedom and can act more aggressively in Africa. So that's exactly where he's going to go. Okay, everyone's worried about German expansion. Italy is free to act aggressively in the south, and they're looking to Africa, and they will invade Abyssinia. Abyssinia in the 1930s was one of the only African countries independent from foreign rule. They were kind of like the last ones standing. They're also a member of the League of Nations, but Mussolini wants to conquer it. Mussolini wants to conquer this, and it will be an expansion of his empire. If we look at the political cartoon here, we see Mussolini holding a gas mask, poison gas, a lot of kind of chemical warfare that's supposed to be illegal. And in the background there, we see a lot of dead Abyssinian people. The caption at the bottom reads, "Pah! They were uncivilized savages without ideals." Kind of very ironic in a way that it's Mussolini who's holding the illegal weaponry and the savagery of his assault against the more innocent Abyssinian people. So why does Mussolini want to conquer Abyssinia? Why does he want this? Well, Mussolini will gain more popularity at home if he has military victories. And we have to remember that they already tried to take over Abyssinia once, and they failed. That was pretty embarrassing. So this would avenge that loss. He really wants to avenge the defeat at the Battle of Adawa in 1896. That was a huge embarrassment for Italy. So if he wins, this kind of brings national pride back to Italy. And if he wins, he doesn't just get the territory and the land, he also gets the people within it. People or soldiers for future wars. You have to remember, if you were Germany fighting World War I on the Western Front, yes, you were fighting the French and the British, but you were fighting all of their colonies as well. You would be fighting soldiers from India, soldiers from Canada, soldiers from Morocco. So you would have all sorts of different nationalities and ethnicities that you were fighting on the Western Front. Italy sees that. They want to be a great power like the French and the British and want to have, for their future wars, more soldiers from other parts of the world. There's also economic reasons to take over Abyssinia. We talked already about that whole idea of autarky, being able to be self-sufficient. Having Abyssinia now, they would have more land for resources. They would have markets for selling goods. So begins the invasion of Abyssinia, which follows a dispute in the city of Walwal, December 1934. Italy and Abyssinian soldiers will meet in kind of a standoff. 30 Italian soldiers are killed. Mussolini demands an apology for this action, demands compensation from the Abyssinians. Abyssinian Emperor Haile Selassie calls out to the League of Nations. Remember, they are a member of the League themselves. So calls out to the League of Nations, we need help. Come and investigate what's happening here. It's Italy that is at fault. Mussolini refuses to accept a League of Nations investigation. Mussolini and Italy, they're also members of the League of Nations, and they refuse to accept an investigation. So at this point, Mussolini pushes his own armies to invade. October 3rd, 1935, 500,000 Italian troops invade Abyssinia. Selassie pleads to the League of Nations, but not much is done. They do put economic sanctions on Italy. Good for you, League of Nations. But who cares? Ultimately, they're kind of showing again how slow and useless they are. Italy wants to be economically independent anyway. So economic sanctions, big deal. May of 1936, Italian forces take the capital of Abyssinia. By May 9th, Abyssinia is formally annexed by Italy and becomes part of the Italian Empire. The results? Italy gains territory in Africa with few Italian losses. They're only suffering about 1,000 casualties from this. So with the invasion of Abyssinia, it seems like Italy is breaking the Stresa Front. They're really creating a new enemy with Britain. The British, as we know, have a powerful navy, a very powerful navy, with deep interest in the Mediterranean Sea. That waterway needs to stay open. It's really essential to the British Empire. They need to get through the Mediterranean to the Suez Canal, to the Red Sea, to the Arabian Sea, to get to India. So Britain's kind of upset with this, and they're upset with Italy for starting to show fractures in this Stresa Front. Italy is not really prepared to face the British Navy. Their war with Abyssinia, although they were victorious, was very expensive for Italy. So they're not really in a position to now face the might of the British Navy. War is officially over in 1936, but the fighting doesn't stop. The fighting continues. Abyssinian guerrillas will strike at Italian interests in Abyssinia. So Italy really needs to keep a military presence in Abyssinia now. And ultimately, the League of Nations, once again, looks useless. And we've seen a few examples of this now. Japan and Manchuria, and now Italy with Abyssinia. So with the Stresa Front crumbling, who is Italy going to turn to? They're at odds now with Britain and France. Who's left that also kind of needs a friend in Europe as well? If we look at this political cartoon, I believe this is another one from Punch magazine. We have three figures here. Obviously, you can make out Mussolini on the right, and then we have our British and French figures here. The British person is represented by that fictional character John Bull, kind of like your Uncle Sam character, and the French portrayed very feminine as a woman, seen here with the hat of the kind of the sans culotte, the kind of the liberty red hat that the revolutionaries wore during the French Revolution. And this political cartoon is really critical of the British and the French, who are really the last two big members of the League of Nations. Is really all they're doing is kind of wagging a finger at Italy, like, how dare you? And they're giving what's called the awful warning. France and England say this together. We don't want you to fight, but by jingo if you do, we shall probably issue a joint memorandum suggesting a mild disapproval of you. Really, again, showing the uselessness of some of the bigger members here of the League of Nations, where all they're doing is maybe some sanctions and wagging a finger at Italy. And again, we're going to see this happen again with Germany as well. Ultimately, this is all that policy of appeasement that we'll get to a little bit later. Ultimately trying to appease these big bullies of the 1930s, these big dictators, kind of giving in and soothing their egos a little bit. And the British and the French seem to be doing it here with Mussolini. So Italy, all of a sudden, needs to find a buddy. Italy needs a friend. Who do they turn to? Well, who's left? And it's going to be Germany. So Italy now will all of a sudden be fine with Germany taking Austria. Anschluss for Germany, as long as they keep Austria an independent state. Italy will support Germany rearmament programs and starting to rearm the Rhineland, which was going against the Treaty of Versailles. So now all of that internationalism, all that spirit of Locarno is all of a sudden dead. Italy is now aligning itself with Germany, and Italy's going to be fine with German expansion and aggression in Europe as well. The political cartoon here, again by Punch magazine, February 1938. This one is showing the German takeover of Austria, the German annexing of Austria. Here we have Hitler, looks like returning from the Austrian Alps. He's coming back over the mountains. He is depicted as the poacher. He is illegally hunting, and it looks like he has shot and killed a deer. That is Austrian integrity. Mussolini is seen there kind of in the middle ground there, who kind of seems to be just leaning up against the side of the mountain. He seems pretty okay with all this. That's fine with me, Hitler. All good. Mussolini says at the bottom, all right, Adolf, I never heard a shot. So he's very complacent. He's very fine with Hitler going in and killing Austrian integrity and poaching Austria for himself. So this brings us to the Spanish Civil War. This happens in 1936, and we're going to spend a great deal of time on the Spanish Civil War as kind of an independent unit. So we'll go in greater detail for that then. But what we need to know about the Spanish Civil War is that it really pitted many factions against itself. We had right-wing nationalists who were supported by the fascists on one side against the Republicans, who were really, not like U.S. Republicans. If anything, they're kind of like socialists, and they're going to be supported by their comrades, their communist comrades with the Soviet Union. In this Civil War, foreign powers are going to have a lot of influence. And really, in a lot of civil wars in modern history, foreign powers kind of get involved because they want to see their side win. Mussolini put support with the nationalists, and he's going to back Francisco Franco. So will the Nazis. The British, the United States, and the French will support the Republican side. And the Soviet Union will also kind of support this side as well. So Mussolini is aiding the Spanish nationalists, and he's going to send 70,000 troops to Spain, as well as an air force. Hitler will also send equipment and an air force as well, but Italy seems to be offering up a lot more manpower. Franco ultimately wins. And in a way, I guess Mussolini wins as well. But this is very costly to Italy. All the while, Germany is still building its military. Eventually, Mussolini will take a back seat to Hitler. So, although Franco and the nationalists win the Spanish Civil War with the help from Mussolini, it's ultimately a very costly war for Mussolini. A lot of troops, a lot of his air force is going to suffer from this. In the meantime, Germany is building up its military. So by the time we get to the late 1930s, it's going to be Germany that has the dominant military and air force on the continent, and it seems that Mussolini now has to take a back seat to Hitler. So what they do get, though, is Italy gets more influence in the Mediterranean. More tension between Italy and Britain occur because of this. On October 25th, 1936, Germany and Italy will sign the Rome-Berlin Axis. I mentioned this on the first slide. We have to imagine like the world revolves around an axis. Now it looks like all of Europe is revolving around that Rome-Berlin axis. They are pushing closer to each other now. Germany, Italy, and Japan will sign the Anti-Comintern Pact. These three nations will oppose the expansion of communism. So, December 1937, Italy leaves the League of Nations. Here we have our political cartoon from Punch magazine. We have our fictional British character, John Bull. Looks like he's doing a lot of heavy lifting here. The caption at the bottom reads, "Uphill work." John Bull says, "Even though it's only half a league, it must go onward." So he's doing the heavy lifting of the League of Nations, this cart that is the League of Nations. Japan and Germany have already fallen off, and it looks like Italy is the next one to go. So December 1937, that's exactly what happens. Italy leaves the League of Nations. And then things start to kind of go a little fast from this point. We're up pretty much into 1938 here. So by the spring of 1938, Germany will send its army into Austria. Anschluss has begun. And they've annexed Austria in a political union. The fall of 1938. Hitler wants the Sudetenland. So we see this is kind of more or less given to him at the Munich Conference. The Munich Conference, a city in Germany where a lot of the world leaders meet Neville Chamberlain from Britain's there. Adolf Hitler's there. Mussolini is kind of the host. He's kind of running the show. The Czechoslovakians aren't there. Neither is the Soviet Union. So Stalin's not there either. He's at home feeling a bit slighted. Hitler wants the Sudetenland basically because it's an area in Czechoslovakia that's mainly German-speaking. After World War I, when the new boundaries were all set up in place, all of a sudden a lot of German-speaking people no longer found themselves in Germany anymore. They were in Czechoslovakia. So he wanted that Sudetenland back. And the Munich Conference of 1938 is going to give it to him. But Hitler kind of promises. He promises he's not going to go any further. This here is the big moment of this policy of appeasement that kind of blows up in more of the Western leaders' faces. Neville Chamberlain, the guy on the far left there in that photo, the bottom photo, he's the Prime Minister of Britain at this time. He returns to England and says, peace in our time. He has Hitler's signature on this Munich agreement. He's agreed not to go any further. It seems like they've avoided war. Diplomacy has won. They gave in to Hitler. They've soothed his ego a little bit. They've appeased him. They gave him the Sudetenland. Hitler promises not to take any more land. Spring of 1939, Hitler takes over all of Czechoslovakia. So this whole thing does kind of blow up in Chamberlain's face. He comes home and says, peace in our time. He's promised not to take anything else. And then a little bit later, Hitler takes over all of Czechoslovakia, which violates that Munich agreement. So now Mussolini basically says, well, when in Rome, we'll do the same as the Germans, I guess. And Italy will look across to Albania. Albania, if you remember, was a protectorate of Italy. In the 1920s, they had a very good friendship with Italy. But Italy wants to dominate the Adriatic Sea. So, in the late 1930s, we see an end to Albanian independence. Italy sends its troops to take over Albania, and the Albanian king, King Zog, great name, tries to deal with Italy, but ultimately it's a no-go, and he eventually flees Albania. The Albanian government joins in a union with Italy. The fascist government is propped up in Albania. The Italian Empire grows. Then May 22nd, 1939, Germany and Italy signed the Pact of Steel, basically a public declaration of cooperation. But they secretly agree to support each other economically and militarily. They will be aligned. September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland. This is the official beginning of World War II in Europe. But Mussolini is not ready to fight. He doesn't join World War II really at the beginning. But Mussolini is hearing German success after German success after German success and feels like he has to get involved before everything's gone and all the spoils of war are taken by Germany. So even though Mussolini's not really to start this or to get involved in this war, seeing all of the success, that early success that Germany has, provokes Italy to get involved probably a lot quicker than they would have liked. World War II. Italy will begin its aggression in Africa, sending Italian troops from Libya to attack British forces in Egypt. Italy will also send armies from Albania to Greece. Both operations will fail in Egypt and Greece. Italy doesn't have the same success rate that Germany does at the beginning of this war. Germany in the first 6 weeks of World War II has more success than the entirety of World War I. They do very well early on. Italy struggles at the beginning. Things don't go well in North Africa. Things don't go well in Greece. Italy will need support from Germany. Okay, Mussolini will need a lot of support from Hitler. Hitler's going to have to kind of step in and send some aid, send some reserves, send some troops to help Mussolini in North Africa. We're going to end with a political cartoon here. The title at the top, what they probably discussed. Here we have Hitler on the left, Mussolini on the right. Mussolini saying to Hitler, I just want enough help to enable me to win, but not enough to make it appear that you won for me. So obviously he needs Hitler's help, but isn't want an overwhelming amount of help that it looks like he's not doing it for himself. The mindset of the great dictator. That concludes today's episode and really our in-depth look at Italian aggression in the 30s. Now, our next episode, we're going to look at the rise of Nazism in Germany. After we focus in on Germany, we're going to look at the international response of Italy and Germany together. So we'll look at what the international response to this rise of fascism and Nazism collectively in our next episode. Thanks for listening. As always, leave a like and ring that bell for notifications. Thanks for subscribing. Bye-bye.